everybody. It is very, very good to be back. It's been about a year since I've been here to worship with you all, and before we get started in the study tonight, I just want to let you all know just how much it means for me to get back here. I'm looking out and I'm seeing all these people that have helped me grow so much last summer and that I've gotten to keep in touch with, and I'm very, very thankful to God to get to be gathered with you again. It really does mean a lot to me. It's very uplifting to me, and I hope that I can give that back to you a little bit. But that being said, tonight isn't about me. It's not about Matt's back after a year or whatever. This is about glorifying God and studying His Word. So let's put that and myself behind us, and let's get to the actual study tonight. If you'd open up a Bible to 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2. Tonight we're going to read the story of prophetic succession. We're going to read a story about God's holiness. And this chapter about two prophets way, way, way back in history has a whole lot to do about us and how we interact with each other and how we interact with God. And if you know the story of 2 Kings chapter 2, I would invite you to keep an open mind as we study this, because we're going to hopefully look at it in a new way that you have never seen before. And if you haven't read this story, if you don't know the story of 2 Kings 2, I'd advise you to buckle up, because this is a pretty incredible and intense story. So, just a little bit of background before we get to the actual text. 2 Kings 2 is in the middle of the divided kingdom portion of God's people, of Israel. So, you used to have the nation of Israel that was all one nation. You had kings like Saul and David and Solomon. And then because of Solomon's sin, the nation broke in half, right? So you have Israel, the northern kingdom, and Judah, the southern kingdom. And up in the northern kingdom of Israel, God has been sending some prophets, telling the people to turn around because they've had some horrible leadership. They've had some evil kings that are spreading idolatry and immorality and bloodshed. So God's sending prophets to the people and to the king saying, look, turn around or judgment's going to be coming fast. The main prophet that we read about in the book of 1 Kings, the book that comes before this, is the prophet Elijah. And Elijah is something else. I mean, he is an incredible wild man who lives out in the wilderness. He performs these amazing miracles to show off God's power. He stood faces with kings, telling King Ahab and Queen Jezebel to turn from their ways. He went head-to-head against 400 prophets of idolatry, which tells you a little bit about how evil Israel had become. I mean, this guy is incredible. He's bold, he's unashamed, and he's proud to do what he does. But the time has come for Elijah to stop being the prophet. He's gotten pretty weary of all the work he's been doing. And so earlier what we see in 1 Kings is he start to pass off the mantle, quite literally, to his successor, which is Elisha. And that's going to be a little confusing. So pay attention to not exactly what I may say, but what's on the text in your Bible. I may slip up here or there. We're studying about Elijah passing the torch on to Elisha. God says, look, this is going to be the next prophet, the next voice for me among my people to tell them what I need them to do. And this story is all about Elisha as the main character. And he has some big sandals to fill. Elijah has done a lot of good work for God, and Elisha is supposed to be the next one. There's a lot of pressure on Elisha right now. And this story is all about how he comes into this next role, and also, at the same time, this story is about God's holiness. So I want you to keep those themes in mind as we start reading. So, I invite you to read along as we go. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse 1. It came about, when the Lord was about to take up Elijah by a whirlwind to heaven, that Elijah went with Elisha to Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. So it kind of spoils what's about to happen. Elijah is about to be taken up to heaven in this flaming chariot. It's going to be a pretty impressive spectacle that we're going to get to in a little bit. And he knows where he's about to go, and so he says, Elisha, my successor, my apprentice, if you will, stay here, because God sent me other places. And Elisha says, no way. As long as the Lord is alive and as long as you're alive, I'm not going to leave your side. And what we see here is going to be the start of a pattern in this story. So what's going to happen is Elijah and Elisha are going to go to a city, and Elijah's going to say, hey, stay here. Elisha's going to refuse to. They're going to go to the next city, and then the next city. And then it's going to be reversed as the story goes on. So they go to Gilgal together. He refuses to leave him. In verse 3 of chapter 2, the sons of the prophets who are at Bethel came out to Elisha, and they said to him, do you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today? He said, yes, I know. Be still. So the sons of the prophets come out to him, and those are the people that are studying under the prophets or learning from the prophets. They're supposed to be these kind of righteous people. And they come out to Elisha and they say, hey, don't you know the Lord's going to take Elijah away today? Don't you know your master's going to leave today? Which I can imagine is a kind of a touchy subject. Elisha understands that. Somehow these sons of the prophets understand that. And his answer is, yes, I know, be still, be quiet. I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me. And so that happens at the first city in Gilgal. The next thing happens and the pattern repeats in verse 4. Elijah said to him, Elisha, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. He said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I won't leave you. So they came to Jericho. The same thing happened as before. Verse 5, the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho approached Elisha. They said, do you know that the Lord's going to take your master from over you today? He answered, yes, I know. Be still. I know he's going to leave me. I know my mentor, my friend is going to be taken away from me. Don't tell me about it. Hush. Verse 6, Elijah said to him, please stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as the Jordan. He says, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I won't leave you. So the two of them went on. So they started in Gilgal, right? And Elijah says, look, my time's coming short. Go ahead and stay behind for this one. And Elisha refuses. And the sons of the prophets come up and they say, hey, Elijah's leaving. You know that, right? Yeah, I know. Forget telling me about it. They go from Gilgal to Jericho, or to Bethel, Same thing happens. Hey, don't you know Elijah's going to be taken away? Yeah, I know. No, I'm not going to leave you, Elijah. And they go as far as Jericho. Now, they get there, and they go as far as the Jordan River, we saw in verse 6. They're going all the way as we go on this journey. In verse 7, now, 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood opposite them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. So they've come all this way, Elijah and Elisha, this pair, these two prophets of the Lord. And now these sons of the prophets are kind of following them at a distance. They want to see what's going to happen. And they're standing there by the Jordan River. Verse 8, Elijah took his mantle, which is like his coat or his cloak, and he folded it together and he struck the waters. And there they were divided here and there, so that the two of them crossed over on dry ground. He performs this amazing miracle. He splits a river in half to cross to the other side. It's like, if you need any more evidence that Elijah is God's prophet, there it is. This guy's amazing. And so they crossed to the other side of the Jordan. Verse 9, when they crossed over, Elijah said to Elisha, ask what I shall do for you before I'm taken from you. He says, look, I'm about to be taken away from you. Is there anything that I can do for you? And Elisha says in verse 9, please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me. I want to be twice the prophet that you were, Elijah. Verse 10, he says, you've asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if you see me when I'm taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it won't be so. So he wants to have this double portion of Elijah's spirit. He wants to be twice the prophet that Elijah was, which is a pretty tall order, he understands. And so he says, if you see me when I'm taken up, it'll be done for you. And if not, then you understand the other side of this deal. And so they go on talking. In verse 11, as they were going along and talking, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, which separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven. Elisha sees this. He sees a flaming chariot appear out of nowhere and take up his master away from him. And this is what he says in verse 12. Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw Elijah no more. Now, a lot of times when you read this, you just kind of automatically assume that he's talking about the chariots that just took his master away. It's like, all right, flaming chariots appeared, they took him away, and he says, oh, look at these chariots. But I'd suggest to you, he's referring to Elijah himself. Think about this in Old Testament times. What were chariots symbolic of? What were they used for? Well, they were used in warfare, right? It was a big advantage to have a chariot in warfare. It's a lot similar to if you had a tank in World War I. It's a big deal to have a chariot in a battle. And he says, Elijah, you're the chariot of Israel. You're the real power of Israel. You're the might of Israel. You're God working among his people. It doesn't matter what army we have. It's God working among us. That's the power we have. And I think this because as Elijah's taken away, Elisha recognizes his power. And then later on in this book, as Elisha's about to die, King Joash says this same phrase about Elisha. He's recognizing that God's working among his people is the nation's real power. So, I want you to try and understand what's happened so far. Elisha has gone with his master. His master has said, look, I'm going to be taken from you. You need to stay behind. And Elisha refuses to do that. The sons of the prophets come up and they say, hey, your master's going to be taken away from you. He says, yeah, I know. And he gets this far, and he understands he's supposed to be the next prophet. He's responsible for telling the people what God needs them to know. And he's supposed to come behind Elijah, the great prophet who performed all these miracles, who was such a great man. And all of a sudden, your master, your mentor, your friend is taken away from you to heaven, and you're standing there on your own with just his coat. This is a big moment for Elisha. And we're going to try and understand what happens next in the story. Verse 12, he saw Elijah no more. And he took hold of his clothes and he tore them in two pieces. This is the Jewish sign of showing mourning. He's sad at the loss of his master. Oh, thanks, Bruce. I've got a bit of a scratchy throat. Sorry, guys. So he's mourning for his master that's taken from him. In verse 13, he took up the mantle or the coat of Elijah that fell from him, and he returned and he stood by the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and he struck the waters. He said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" This is kind of the telling moment, right? Remember, whenever they came across the Jordan the first time, Elijah hit the waters with his coat, and it parted. So now Elisha comes to the river, and he says, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" He tries to do the same thing. He says, he's kind of asking God, "Are you with me? Are you going to be with me like God was with Elijah?" And once you know it, verse 14, near the end of verse 14, when he had struck the waters, they divided here and there, and Elisha crossed over. That's the answer he needed, right? It's like, are you going to be with me like you're with him? God's answer is, yeah, you just performed a miracle. I allowed that to happen. You're my next prophet. You're the next Elijah, as confusing as that may be. Now, you remember the sons of the prophets were standing on the other side of the river, waiting to see what would happen. In verse 15, they re-enter the story. When the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho opposite saw him, he comes back from the other side of the river. They said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." They recognize he has some power here. And they came and they meet him, and they bowed down themselves to the ground before him. He said, "Wow, he really is the next prophet." Except, read the next verse. They said to him, "Behold, there are with your servants 50 strong men. Please let them go and search for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has taken him and cast him on some mountain or in some valley." Now, this is kind of a slap in the face to Elisha, right? Because he's come this far, and he's just been proven by God that, yes, you are the next prophet. You're going to be the next prophet like Elijah was. And these sons of the prophets, they come and they say, "Wow, he's got the spirit of Elijah." And they bow down, and then they say, "Hey, you want us to go look for Elijah? Maybe you're really not the next prophet. Maybe God just took him and put him on some mountain or some valley. Maybe he just took him somewhere else. You can't be the next prophet, right? We know Elijah. Elijah did these great things, but maybe we should go look for him. Maybe he's not actually gone." Elisha, who just saw him be taken up to heaven on chariots of fire, says there in verse 16, he said, "You shall not sin." No, don't go looking for him. I just saw him going to heaven. You don't need to look for him. He's gone. I'm the next prophet. Verse 17, they urged him until he was ashamed, and he said, "Sinned." They just keep asking and asking. So he says, "Fine, go looking for him." Verse 17, they sent therefore 50 men. They searched for 3 days and didn't find him. 50 men can cover a lot of ground in 3 days, even if they are just walking around or possibly on horses. And so they come back in verse 18. They returned to him while he was staying at Jericho, and he said, "Didn't I tell you, don't sin?" This is Elisha saying, "I told you so. I told you not to go looking for him. He's gone. I'm the next prophet." And so what we're going to see here is a really cool story arc that we have going on here. So at the beginning of the story, it was Elijah and Elisha. And they were going on this trip together from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho, all the way to the Jordan River. And all of a sudden, Elijah is taken away. And what we're going to see in the rest of this chapter is Elisha makes that same trip, except this time he's on his own. He's by himself. And as he goes, he's going to meet opposition all the way through and doubt that he's the next prophet. It starts at this very last stop of the Jordan River. And they're saying, yeah, but we should go find Elijah. He's the real prophet. You can't be the next one. And he proves himself, right? He does these miracles. They look for Elijah and they don't find him. He says, look, I am the real prophet. And like I said, he's going to retrace his steps that he had formerly went with his master. And he's going to meet opposition all the way. Verse 19, while he's in Jericho, the men of the city said to Elisha, behold, now the situation of the city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water's bad, and the land's unfruitful. So they have a water problem here in Jericho. He said, bring me a new jar and put salt in it. So they brought it to him. He went out to the spring of water, and he threw salt in it, and said, thus says the Lord, I have purified these waters. There shall no longer be death or unfruitfulness from here. So the waters have been purified to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he had spoke. And so the men of Jericho come to him. So he's supposedly supposed to be this next prophet. And they say, look, our water's bad. People are drinking it and dying. We're not getting any crops from it. So it says, it's okay, bring me a jar and put some salts in it. I'm going to throw some salt in the water, and that'll make it clean. I bet none of the people there had thought of that. But it works, right? The miracle is done, and the water is suddenly purified. And it's like, all right, there's another miracle. He's the next prophet. He's doing things that no one can do. He's obviously God's chosen prophet. But as he goes on this journey, both from the Jordan River, having to argue with the sons of the prophets, he goes to Jericho, and he's having to perform miracles so that they believe him. Now he's going to get to Bethel. And it's right here in verse 23 that we have one of the most controversial Bible stories in the Old Testament. So let's go ahead and try and read it without me kind of prepping you for what's about to happen. He went up that way from there to Bethel. And as he was going up by the way, young lads came out to him from the city, and they mocked him, said, go up, you bald head, go up, you bald head. And when he looked behind him and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads in their number. And from there he went to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Samaria. And you read this, and it's like, what in the world just happened? Like what is going on in this story? It's like, all right, this is a story about Elisha becoming the next prophet. And he goes and he's doing miracles to show that he's the next prophet. And now he's going to kill a bunch of kids with bears. That doesn't seem to fit the theme of the rest of this chapter. And what's going on here? Is God just this vengeful person that can't take a joke? That these little kids come out teasing him and he kills them with bears of all things? Why can't he just strike them down? That might be a little more ethical, if at all, right? This story is very confusing. And a lot of people point at it to say, look, the God of the Old Testament's vengeful and hateful and mean, right? But the problem is they start reading from verse 23. They start right there near the end of this chapter and just read the bear part of the story and say, wow, God's pretty terrible. But I'd suggest to you that that's not what's happening in this story. Instead, we see a God who is tried time and time again to show what he's saying is true. And people keep rejecting it. And here, God is defending his holiness. He is demanding respect for his name. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes in this story than oftentimes you see at first look. So the first detail we need to look at when we're kind of reworking this last story as he's going on this trip by himself is that it says in verse 23, he went up from there to Bethel. All right, and that's an important city in the Old Testament. Because you remember back in 1 Kings chapter 12, that's when the kingdom of Israel split into Israel and Judah, right? And so Jeroboam is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. And he remembers, so all the Jews are supposed to go to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, his enemy nation right now, to go worship like 3 times a year. And if all of my people keep going down to Jerusalem, to the other country, they're going to realize that they don't really want me as their king, and they're all going to leave me. I can't have that. And so King Jeroboam sets up 2 idols for them to worship. What a great solution to his problem, right? Let's suggest idolatry. That'll make things better. And he sets up 2 idols, one in Dan and the other in Bethel. And so Elisha comes to this city that at first seems a little unassuming if you're just reading the text out of nowhere. But understand, he's coming up to this city that's full of idolatry. That's the city he's coming to. He was going up by the way, and it says in verse 23, young lads came out from the city and mocked him. Your version, if you have the ESV, it says young boys, which makes it sound even worse because not a lot of people say the word lad, right? And so you're reading this and you're imagining a bunch of little 5-year-old kindergartners, right? It's like, that's what a young boy is. I have a little brother who's 6, and that's like, oh, a bunch of 6-year-olds came out and got killed by bears by God. What a great thing to happen, right? That's the way we imagine the story, but we need to understand what's actually happening here. He comes to this idolatrous city, and the term there, young lads or young boys, whatever your version may say, is a Hebrew phrase that appears a few different times. And like other Hebrew ways of measurement of age in the Old Testament, it's kind of got a broad scale, okay? Like in Genesis 39, this phrase, young lad or young boy, is used to describe Joseph, who at the time is 17 years old. That's a young boy. It's like, okay, well, there's a big difference between a bunch of 6-year-olds calling someone bald and a mob of 17-year-old teenagers coming out and making fun of someone. That's kind of a different mentality. I would be more scared of one mob than the other, right? But at the same time, that phrase describes a 17-year-old Joseph, but it also describes Naaman when he's cleared of his leprosy. Later on in this book, it says that his skin was as clean and smooth as a young child. And that's what we would imagine as a really small kid, right? We dote on little kids having soft skin, not so much teenagers. And so this word has a wide range. And we can't be certain on how old these people were, but I would suggest to you these people weren't just kids innocently teasing someone because they were bald. They seem to be coming out with purpose and with intent. And they come out and they mock him, saying, "Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head." Which, once again, is kind of an unassuming phrase. It's like, these are just some young people coming out, and they're saying, go on, get out of here, you bald person. That's pretty harmless, right? That's not, once again, what's happening in this story. So let's cover what we've gotten so far. He comes to an idolatrous city where these people of whatever age they were, I think they were morally responsible for their actions. They come out and they start mocking him, saying, "Go up, you bald head," which is an interesting phrase because the only time that phrase has showed up in this chapter beforehand is when Elijah was taken up to heaven. So what are they saying here? They're just saying, hey, get out of our town, we don't like you. That's kind of a different thing. No, what they're telling Elisha to do, they're saying, why don't you go up to heaven like Elijah did? Why don't you prove yourself like Elijah did? I mean, he was a prophet. He went up to heaven. How about you go up too? Show us that cool trick, prophet. How about you go up out of heaven and get out of our town? We don't want you here. That's what they're saying. They're not saying, go ahead and scoot, you bald person. They're making fun of his appearance, but more importantly, they're mocking him as God's prophet. They're saying, we don't want your prophet here. We don't want any of this action going on in our city. You need to leave. And then we have this crazy reaction, right? Elisha looks behind him in verse 24. He cursed them in the name of the Lord. 2 female bears came out of the woods and tore up 42 lads of their number, which, once again, gives some consideration about the people that came out of the city. It wasn't like 5 or 6 little kindergartners calling someone bald. This was a mob of at least 42 people coming out and screaming at this guy to go up and mocking God. And he calls out these 2 bears, and this isn't a particularly nice argument to make, but there's a perfectly good Hebrew word for kill or for murder, and it's not one used here. It says mauled. It doesn't say they died. It doesn't say they didn't die, but the word there doesn't necessarily mean to kill them. And that seems harsh to us, right? It's like, first off, they're young. Second off, they didn't kill anybody. They weren't super immoral. They're making fun of this bald prophet. What's the big deal? It doesn't seem that bad. That's not the point of this story, and it's not what's happening. The way we need to understand what's happening is that all throughout this story, as soon as Elisha has become prophet, he's met opposition, and he's met doubt from God's people. From the very beginning, he comes across the river, and he does this miracle, and it's like, wow, he did the same thing Elijah did. He's the next prophet. And they say, hey, where's Elijah? We need him back. You're not the guy. He comes to Jericho, and he has to perform a miracle so that they'll believe who he is. He comes to Bethel, and these idolatrous people say, go on and get to heaven. Get out of here. We don't want you here. They're mocking God. And all this time, God's been patient. He's shown them people miracles. He's given them proof of what he said. And here, God is putting his foot down. He says, I'm not going to be made fun of. You're not going to make fun of me, and you're not going to make fun of the person I've chosen to be as my voice among my people. You're not going to make fun of God and get away with it. That's the point of this story. And so often we read this and it's like, what's going on here? There's bears, there's children. It's a confusing story. But what we actually see when you read the whole story in context is it's God defending his holiness. He's saying, I'm going to be treated as holy. And that's a word we read a lot in the Bible. It occurs all the time. You know, we sing it in songs. There's a song titled just the word 3 times in a row. And it's like, well, what does that word actually mean? To be holy, there's other synonyms like sanctified or uncommon. It means to be set apart, to be on a whole different shelf is kind of the idea, right? So you have all the common people, and then you have something that's holy. It's different. It's separate from everything else. And so when God's defending his holiness, he says, look, I'm not going to be made fun of. I'm going to be treated as something different, as something as valuable, and something that's special. Because that's what God is. He's not going to be put up with being mocked. But this idea about God being holy, and more specifically, God defending his holiness, is kind of a confusing concept at times too. Go ahead and look in Ezekiel chapter 36. Ezekiel chapter 36. This is way back in history. This is farther along than 2 Kings 2. But we come to Ezekiel chapter 36, and Ezekiel is one of God's other prophets, this time during Babylonian captivity. He comes to God's people, and they're in captivity. They're slaves. Their nation has been destroyed. But Ezekiel comes with a hopeful message. He says, look, God's going to restore you to your land. You're going to rebuild your cities. You're going to rebuild Jerusalem. You're going to return to your homes. But then he adds this disclaimer at the end of his message, this hopeful message of restoration. In Ezekiel 36, verse 22, therefore say to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, it's not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I'm about to act, but for my holy name that you've profaned among the nations where you went. He says, I'm going to restore you. I'm going to bring you back to your land. I'm going to give you your houses back. You're going to be a free people again. But he says, but pay attention, because it's not for you. It's for my holy name. And you read that, and it's like, wait a minute. I thought God loved his people, and he restored them because he had mercy on them, and he cared about them, and he was showing his kindness. But here he's saying it's not about them. It's about his name, his holy name. And that sounds kind of selfish. Sounds kind of conceited, right? And you continue reading in verse 23. He says, I will vindicate the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, which you've profaned in their midst. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the Lord God, when I prove myself holy among you in their sight. He goes on from verse 24 down, talking about how he's going to gather his people from where they were captured. He's going to restore them to plenty and to have food and to have shelter, and they're going to be safe. He says he's going to do all these good things for them. In verse 29, he says he's going to save them from their uncleanness. He'll call for them grain and multiply it. He won't bring famines on them. He talks about in verse 26, giving them a new heart. And all of this sounds a lot more akin to the language we're expecting to hear. It's like, well, he's putting a new heart in them. He says he's giving them his spirit. He loves his people. But then you get down to verse 31, and he repeats the thing that he had said earlier. Verse 31 of Ezekiel 36, he says, then you will remember your evil ways, your deeds that weren't good, and you'll loathe yourselves in your own sight for your iniquities and your abominations. I'm not doing this for your sake, declares the Lord God. Let it be known to you. Be ashamed and confounded for your ways, O house of Israel. And you read this, and it's like, that's not the picture of God that you expect, right? It's like God is wrathful against evil, and he should be, and he's just. But I thought God did these things because he cared for his people. I thought he restored them because he loved them, and he wanted to show his kindness. And that's definitely true. We see that illustrated in many other passages from other prophets. But God's point here is he says, look, I'm going to defend my holy name. People are going to know that I am holy, that I am set apart. And it's like, that sounds kind of selfish, kind of conceited, right? That's not the image of God that's kind of easy to hear about. But I'd suggest to you that he's not trying to defend himself because he's self-conceited and full of his own image. God sees himself exactly as he should see himself. He doesn't exaggerate his own image. I want you to think about this. If Israel walks around on the world stage among all the other nations, And they claim to be worshiping the only true God that is promised to defend them and win their battles for them, which he had promised. And then that nation of Israel, with their all-powerful God, gets defeated. They don't follow his laws. They get taken away into captivity. All these other nations around them are going to say, wow, some God, right? Did them a lot of good. We defeated them and their God. Our gods are more powerful than their God. That's what they had done. He says, you've profaned my name among the nations. So he says, I'm going to restore you. I'm going to bring you back because my name has to be considered holy. So that all the other nations will understand that I am all-powerful, that I am in control. And once again, not because God's full of himself or trying to promote his own name. He's saying, look, unless people understand that I am to be taken seriously, unless people understand that I am actually capable of doing what I say I can do, no one's going to come to me for help. No one's going to come to me for the salvation that they desperately need. If we don't take God seriously, then no one's going to come to God for help, and they need God's help. And so when God defends his holiness, like he does here in Ezekiel 36, he says, I'm going to restore you to the land so that people know that I am powerful. It's not because he's just trying to show off or that he's full of himself. He's saying, look, if people understand I'm powerful, they'll understand that I am the one that can help them, that I am the one that can save them. They need to treat me like I'm holy for their sake. And that's the same thing happening in 2 Kings chapter 2, right? Because let's say Elisha goes through all this and God doesn't do the whole bear thing. He doesn't perform those miracles. He says, look, guys, I'm the next prophet. And then people say, oh, yeah, whatever. Go on. Go up to heaven. Get out of here. You're not the next prophet. And then nothing happens. He says, oh, yeah, well, look at this miracle. Nothing happens. They're going to say, yeah, whatever. You're a laughingstock, Elisha. Your God's a laughingstock. He can't do anything, and you can't do anything. And that may not be the truth at all. It's not the truth. But if God isn't treated as holy, guess who's going to come to him for help? Guess who's going to come to him for salvation? No one. God has to be treated as holy so that people will know where to look when they need saving. And everybody needs saving. God doesn't defend his holiness for his own sake so that he can have his own self-image and his pride built up. God defends his holiness because that's what's best for everybody else. They need to have a God to look up to and to respect and to fear. That's what people need. They need someone to lean on because if they lean on themselves, they fall apart. We all know that. God defends his holiness because it's what his people needs. And so we look at that and it's like, that's a great story. And man, I've never read that story like that before. I finally understand the whole bears attacking the young people thing. I get it now. That's great. So what? That happened a long time ago. Long time ago. And even Ezekiel, who came after him, still a really long time ago, belonging to a certain nation that I'm not a part of, under a certain covenant that, once again, I'm not a part of. So what? What's the point? I mean, these are cool stories. They're interesting and they're fascinating, and it's even encouraging to a point, but what do I need to do because of this? What can I do that emulates what we learn in this story? Well, we see the idea of holiness appear many times in the New Testament. And this same problem can be prevalent in our society of people not treating God as holy. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. What we need to do is we need to draw some parallels. So to draw a connection between what happened in that story with Elisha and the bears and all the people that rejected him in Bethel, and us today as Christians, as God's ambassadors, as his priests for the world around us today, as the church, what are the parallels? Well, first thing we need to consider is what's the problem? The problem in Elisha's story is that people are mocking God. They're not taking him seriously. They don't respect him. They don't treat him as holy. Is there a way that problem can happen to us today? And I will say absolutely. There's a specific way it happens. There are Christian comedians out there, right? They're supposed to be family friendly. They tell jokes that aren't dirty jokes or contain bad language, and you can take the whole family there and have a good laugh. Some of them are specifically Christian comedians because they joke about Christian things. And there are comedians out there that mock God. People like John Christ or Rowan Atkinson, they have these different bits and skits about how funny it is to laugh at God. And not all their jokes are terrible. And I'm not telling you that you can't have a sense of humor. There are things in the Bible that are funny. Like we saw in 2 Kings 2, when he tells the people, yeah, I told you so, don't go looking for him. It's supposed to be ironic. It's supposed to do that to draw our attention to the irony of the story. What I'm telling you is it's not a bad, sinful thing inherently to joke about things that may be in the Bible. But it's a bad thing to joke about God, to make him the butt of your jokes, to laugh at him for what he's done. That's only detrimental to both the people around us and to ourselves. They'll make these jokes making Jesus out to be nothing more than a magician with parlor tricks. Jesus, showing us another miracle. Do another cool trick like that. Or they'll say, what was God thinking when he created fill in the blank? Wow, we have a culture that pictures God as this old, behind-the-times fuddy-duddy, this old man with a white beard up in the clouds who's behind the times and arbitrary. That's how society will often depict God in movies or in cartoons or in books, and that's the God of Christianity. We can laugh at him, right? It's pretty funny. And that is so detrimental, not just to the Christian faith, but to everyone else outside of the Christian faith. And this is the problem. In 1 Peter chapter 3, in verse 14, Peter writes to these Christians, he says, "But even if you suffer for the sake of righteousness, you're blessed. Don't fear their intimidation and don't be troubled. Instead of complaining when you're suffering or being scared of that, he says, sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts." That word sanctify is a synonym of holiness, right? He's saying treat God as holy. Set him apart in your heart. Why? What's the purpose of this? Continuing in verse 15, he says, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that's in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. He says you need to sanctify Christ as holy in your hearts. You need to treat him holy. Why? So that you're going to be ready to share the hope that you have. You have blessings. You have promises from God, a promise for hope and life after this one, of help in your hard times. And unless you treat God like he's holy, you're not going to be able to share that with other people. And okay, so that's a concept, that's an idea. What does that look like? Let's say you're at school or at the workplace, and someone makes a joke making fun of God, right? They'll talk about, I really hate this one, the big man upstairs, right? Or some just kind of horribly disrespectful way to talk about God. And they make a joke, and everyone in the room is laughing. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'll tell you this. Let's go through the kind of options we have. If you laugh at that joke, the people around you are going to stand, okay, yeah, he thinks that's pretty funny. That really must not be that serious of a thing, right? Because there's certain things that we don't joke about, right? It's just not a polite thing, but it shows the seriousness of a topic. And I mean, there's people out there that will joke about anything because they don't really respect anything or take it seriously. But you're not supposed to joke about funerals. That's pretty out of taste because you want to show respect for what's happening. You don't joke about the Holocaust or things like that. It's out of bounds. Hands off. You don't joke about that. And so, because it's serious, right? And so when people joke about God and you laugh along with it, the message you're sending them is, it's really not that serious. It's really not that important to me. Whereas if someone makes a joke like that and you don't laugh along, and maybe you even talk to them, which is a scary thing to do, or maybe they ask you, hey, I saw you weren't laughing at my joke, which is kind of already an awkward conversation to have. But they come up to you, and you can take that and say, well, this is a serious thing to me. I go to church, I take this seriously. My faith is important to me. And I'd really respect it if you wouldn't make fun of my religion, of my beliefs. And all of a sudden that person realizes, whoa, this person takes something seriously, and this is important to them. There's a lot of dumb people out there, but people aren't dumb. They pick up on what you take seriously. They understand what you value. And I'm telling you, when people make fun of God and you laugh along with it, or God forbid you make fun of God, what they're understanding is they don't take it that seriously. It's not that important to them. And so if you're always joking or laughing along with jokes that make God out to be this arbitrary old white man, old Santa Claus in the clouds, who's going to come up to you and say, hey, I'm interested about your faith? Nobody. It's like, yeah, I'm interested to go meet with all those, narrow-minded, backwards Christians, yeah, I don't want any part of that. It's not a serious thing to me. I don't take it seriously. I don't respect it. God is not holy to them because you have not treated him as holy. 1 Peter 3 talks about if we're not treating God as holy, it's going to neutralize our effect to help others, to share the hope that we have. And that's a problem. We want to share the hope we have with others, but more importantly, for us personally, it affects not only those around us, but also ourselves. In 1 Peter chapter 1, he also talks about this holiness problem. 1 Peter 1 and verse 13, he's been talking about this salvation that Bruce talked about earlier. The prophets have been telling about it for thousands and thousands of years, and it's finally come to pass. We have salvation in Christ. And he says, verse 13, because of that salvation, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Fix your hope on Christ because we have salvation in him. In verse 14, as obedient children, don't be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it's written, you shall be holy, for I'm holy. He's quoting from Leviticus right here. And this is a pretty heavy thing if you think about it, right? Because you can read through this, it's like, all right, holy, holy, I get it, Bible words, keep reading, story goes on. But I really want you to try and unpack what he's talking about here. He says, God is not just offering it, he's expecting us to be holy like he is. God's saying, I want you to be like me, which, it's a pretty tall order. That's a daunting task. You think about Elisha, it's like you have to live up to Elijah's shadow. It's like that's pretty hard to do. And now God is saying, look, I want you to be like me. It's like I fall way short of that. That's out of my league. That's impossible for me. But God wouldn't tell us to do anything that we weren't able to do. He says, I want you to be holy like I'm holy. And certainly we're not going to be exactly like that. I'm not going to be as holy as deity. That's just not going to happen. We're not ever going to be on the same level as God that way. But he says, you need to be holy like I'm holy. And so if we're not treating God like he's holy, that totally negates our own holiness, right? Our holiness is dependent on God's. If all of a sudden we don't treat him like he's holy, we're not going to understand ourselves as being holy. Think about it this way in practical terms. So you've joked about God and you laugh along with the representations of God as just this imaginary security blanket for those people that can't take the harsh realities of this world, right? God's the kind of old grandpa figure in the clouds. That's how you've thought about him. That's how the world pictures him, and you're kind of okay with that. And then all of a sudden, life gets really hard. Sorrow hits. Suffering hits. Loss hits. And you're on your knees praying because you need help. You cannot bear this on your own. And all of a sudden, as you're praying, the thought comes in your mind, is this doing any good? Am I just talking to that imaginary friend up there? Is this all just me speaking into thin air? Because you haven't treated God as holy. You don't think about God as holy. And all of a sudden, when you need help, that doubt is the only thing that's going to be in your mind. If God is not holy, if he's not someone that's capable, if he's not able to be respected, like he talks about in the Bible that we saw, like with Ezekiel, we're not going to be able to trust that imaginary friend for help when we desperately need that help. When God says, I want you to be holy like I'm holy, all of a sudden that doesn't really mean anything, right? It's like God's really not that set apart to us. We'll joke about him, we'll laugh at him, it's no problem. And so what does it mean for us to be holy? I don't know. I don't treat God any differently than I would any of my friends, right? I'll joke at my friends, I'll make fun of them, and I'll make fun of God too. It's no different. All of a sudden, our faith is torn apart because we've broken the series of things. God is holy. He is set apart, far above us. And when we do anything to diminish that distance between us and God, to respect him less, God forbid, mock him, there's no reason for us to be Christians, right? Why believe in something that's not special? Why believe in something that's not capable, that's not actually able to help me? It's pointless, right? If we don't treat God as holy, it not only hurts the people around us, we're not going to be able to teach them. They're not going to want help from something that is not holy. And we're going to be lost ourselves. Because when we seek the help we desperately need, we're not going to find it in that old man in the clouds. That's not the one that helps us. The one that helps us isn't this caricature, this cartoon old man that we've made God out to be. The God that helps me is a God that's holy, that's unapproachable, that is set apart and special unlike anything else in creation. I need God to be holy. I need to treat God like he's holy. And it's not because he's prideful. It's not because he has this self-image that just craves needing to be verified by all these little creatures he's made. God needs to be treated as holy because that's what people need. People need someone to look up to. They need someone to respect. They need someone that's capable to help them. And our part in this is to make sure that that's the image of God that is surrounded in the world. We need to treat God as holy, not just because it's what he tells us to do and it's a command. That's certainly a reason to do that. But the reasoning behind the commandment is because that's what people need. People need a holy God. And so as we study these stories, you read about Elisha, you read about the bears, and you're like, what's going on here? It's about God's holiness. It's not about God's selfishness or his pride or his ignorance of his creatures. The stories about Elisha, the message that Ezekiel brought, the thing that Peter's talking about, is about God being treated in a way that benefits his creation. God being treated in a way that people need him to be treated. That's what this is about. That's what the story with the bears hurting the children is all about. We need to treat God as holy. And as he said, it's not impossible. We can become holy like he was holy. That's only if you would obey him. There may be someone in the crowd tonight that you're hearing this and it's like the message of this lesson is God is something to be dealt with. God's not this thing you joke about. God is serious. He's something to be respected because he is so far above any of us. You may be asking yourself, well, how can I even come close to that? He is so holy, and I'm telling you, I'm unworthy. And believe me, I understand that because it's the same thing for everybody else. I'm telling you, if you want to become holy like he's holy, if you want to approach this God, then all he would have you do is come, believe in him, and obey him, to take on a life like he lived, of obedience to the Father, like Bruce talked about this morning. And we will be holy like God is holy. If there's anything we can do to help you make that decision tonight, would you please come up to the front up here while we stand and while we sing?